Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and in tonight's video I'm going to look at the intriguing possibilities of a connection or a link between two areas that often get discussed separately in Western esotericism, but have little things within them that hint at a connection. I'm talking, of course, about Enochian magic on the one hand, and then the apocryphal Books of Enoch on the other. Both of them are concerned with angels, ascent into heaven to commune with those angels, and they name drop the prophet Enoch from the book of Genesis, which has led many to hypothesize a connection between the two. And then, of course, there are the skeptics who say there's no reason to believe the two are connected. And as I usually try and find interesting connections between separate things on this channel, it will come as no surprise to you to hear that I think that they are in fact connected, and I'm going to demonstrate the ways that they are connected tonight. But first I want to do a quick plug. I have recently appeared on an episode of the podcast Casual Temple, so if you want to see that interview, then I'll leave a link to that episode in the description below. You can also find it on Spotify and other streaming services. But yeah, check out the Casual Temple podcast, which covers a lot of spiritual, occult, sort of esoteric topics on there. So go check it out again. Okay, so if we're going to surmise a connection between Enochian magic on the one hand and the Books of Enoch on the other, we need to get some historical context right, and then we need to see if there's anything linking those. So the Books of Enoch were something going back to the 3rd to 4th century of BC through to about the 5th or 6th century AD, a kind of genre of literature known as Enochic literature, written in the style of other biblical books, dealing with the prophet Enoch and his adventures in heaven, talking to the angels, and being given prophecy and stuff like that. For a lot of time, from the very early centuries of the Common Era through to about the 17th century, the Books of Enoch, for the most part, were not really very well known in the Western world. And so far as they were known only to a very select few people. And then you've got Enochian magic. This is a system of Western ceremonial magic that came about in the Elizabethan era, so the 1500s, late 1500s, drawing on Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and a number of other kinds of currents that come out of the Western esoteric tradition. No explicit connection with the Books of Enoch, though, as we'll see, there are some threads that they have in common. But given that the body of literature, of the Enochic literature, already existed at this time, could it have been said to directly influence Enochian magic? Well, to ask that question, we need to look at John Dee and Edward Kelley, particularly John Dee, and see if he ever had any exposure to any of the Books of Enoch. And indeed, Dee does seem to have some kind of level of knowledge of some of the themes in the Books of Enoch, because he talks about the lost Book of Enoch, which is in heaven, which contains all knowledge, which he is trying to access through the Enochian kind of communications, or he's trying to re-access that knowledge. The Book of Enoch in heaven is not to be confused with the Books of Enoch themselves, the apocryphal texts, which indeed do not claim to be that Book of Enoch, but they do tell the story of Enoch receiving that book in heaven. So that's where the idea comes from. So Dee must have had that idea transmitted to him somehow. The most common explanation that you see on the internet is that there was kind of like a fad of the legend of Enoch that was popular among Western esotericists of the time, and that's how Dee picked up on it. But there is one source, and it's one of my top picks for books on Enochian magic, which does draw a concrete historical link between Dee and at the very least the first book of Enoch. I'm talking about the book John Dee and the Empire of Angels by Jason Louv. In this particular volume, Louv describes how when Dee was a younger man, he was the student of another prominent occultist of the time, who was known as Guillaume Postel. And Postel, at one time, travelled to the city of Rome, and while he was in Rome, he encountered a priest from Ethiopia who recounted the story of Enoch as covered in the first book of Enoch, which of course uniquely was part of the canon of the Ethiopian Bible at that time, whereas it wasn't really known in the Western world. And so Postel learnt of the first book of Enoch from this Ethiopian priest, and it's quite probable, given Dee's sort of foreknowledge of the themes of that book, that Postel passed that knowledge on to Dee. We don't know exactly how extensive the knowledge of 1 Enoch and its contents was for Postel, and therefore for Dee, but there was at least some transmission of knowledge that happened in that way. So Dee could be said to have had, what would it be, third-hand knowledge of the first book of Enoch and some of its contents. So this already suggests that, the Enochian system that Dee was developing as he scried with the angels was picking up on the very same themes that exist in the book of Enoch. Ascending to the same heavens, speaking to the same angels, ministering the same holy throne, and giving the same type of knowledge, as I will demonstrate. And irrespective of whether John Dee made connections with an existing body of literature, the Enochic body of literature, in his own magical work, because he knew about it from actually having knowledge of those sources in a worldly sense, or whether he tapped into the same reservoir of knowledge that the mystical Hecalot tradition that produced the Enochic literature also tapped into, and that's where the same themes come from, is a matter of discussion. But however the connection happens, we should be able to demonstrate if there is a connection by finding similarities between what is in the Enochian system of magic and what is mentioned in the Enochic literature. And as it happens, there are several such similarities, which I'll go into now. So the first theme, as I've already touched upon, is this idea that there is a book of Enoch that was written or transcribed by Enoch as a result of him ascending into heaven and receiving knowledge from God, or perhaps the angels, which gave him knowledge of all things that could be known by a human being, and even some things beyond what a human being could know, which can't even be known by the angels themselves. And this formed the heavenly book of Enoch that supposedly existed. And in fact, this very same book of Enoch is something which, the knowledge of which is purportedly accessed by Dee and Kelley during their scrying sessions with what would become known as the Enochian angels. And the way that they are said to receive this knowledge is by receiving the 49 tables of Logger, which are then compiled into a book, which is said to contain the knowledge of the lost book of Enoch, and which was known from the beginning of the world before the deluge, and now is being restored in the form of this book of Logger. But of course, the tables were indecipherable, and it was necessary to use some other cunning means of intuiting the information contained within, which is why the angels gave Dee and Kelley the calls to open each of the palaces of the heavens, which were represented by each of the tables, to then gain the knowledge that was within each part of heaven and restoring the books and restoring the knowledge that way. But it's the very same idea of ascending into heaven, receiving the knowledge that Enoch received according to the Books of Enoch. And that is the next sort of connection between these two sources, is that the type of knowledge that these angels gave. So in the Books of Enoch, the kinds of knowledge that the angels of God, also known as the Holy Ones, passed on to Enoch was concerning things like the natural order of the universe, what existed in certain parts of the heavens, what existed in certain parts of the earth, what existed beneath the earth, and, you know, mysteries of the mechanics of God's creation, and which revealed the harmonious order of God's creation. And there was also prophecy that was given as well, an account of world history in a prophetic, symbolic kind of a narrative, which revealed deeper spiritual truths behind that history and a deeper spiritual meaning behind that history, and included predictions about the final end of days. But first, there is one thing to consider in talking about knowledge imparted by angels, and something we need to be careful of drawing a distinction between. And that is that there were actually two classes, if you will, of angels that appear in the Books of Enoch. One good and close to God, the holy ones, and the other fallen and rebellious and wicked, in the form of the Watchers. And both gave knowledge to humanity, but they were very different types of knowledge. So the common theme in all of the kind of knowledge given by the Watchers was that it was all the types of knowledge that could be used by people to exploit other people and cause harm to them to gain from that, and even to exploit the natural environment in the same way, all to gain some kind of advantage which wouldn't have otherwise been had. So we have, you know, using metals to create weapons of war, to go to war with others and conquer others, using jewels from the earth to create jewelry, and using cosmetics to use makeup to seduce and manipulate, and using astrology, appealing to a power other than the Most High God to try and gain some kind of an advantage or benefit that way. So those are the kinds of themes that run through the first book of Enoch in terms of the knowledge that the Watchers gave to the human race, and it causes a whole lot of chaos. We don't really see that kind of knowledge in what the angels are telling to Dee and Kelley. Actually, I think it was Edward Kelley asked the angels if they could give him money at one point, and they got quite upset at him for that. They weren't concerned with worldly things and worldly favour upon people at all. So in the process of receiving the communications related to the Book of Logger, John Dee and Edward Kelley were told by the angel Uriel that there were three types of knowledge that would be contained within the books that they would receive from the angels. The knowledge of God truly, the number and doing of his angels perfectly, and the beginning and ending of nature substantially. And you can see that this is very similar to the kind of knowledge that Enoch was given in 1 Enoch, and indeed in 2 Enoch as well. Similarly, the angels of the Heptarchia, another set of angels in the Enochian system, seem to be concerned with giving knowledge to do with the mechanics of the natural world. You've got King Binapor and Prince Butmono, who give knowledge concerning the lifespan of mortal creatures. Angels associated with Prince Bliston, Prince Bliston's ministers, knowing the mysteries of the inside of the earth, and King Bobigel and Prince Bornogo giving different types of wisdom and scientific knowledge. So again, we see the theme of, you know, learning about the natural world, learning about the order of God's creation. And there's also other parts of the Enochian system, besides what is contained in the tables of Logger, which have to do with the kind of history of humanity set out in a symbolic way and a reference to the end times within that timeline. And that is the contents of the so-called round table of Nulvigay, also known as the Corpus Omnium. And this table was divided into parts with a number of different letters, and each of those parts was said to represent a different part of world history. So the first part represented pre-deluge history, the second part represented post-deluge to Christ, the third part represented the crucifixion to the present day, which in those days would have been Elizabethan times, and the final fourth part referred to the times of the tribulation. In other words, the end times. Very similar to the kind of prophetic timelines given to Enoch by the angels in the Enochic literature. And then the final example I want to use is to do with the angels that can be called upon within the great table of the Watchtower, yet another part of the Enochian magical system. And by looking at that, we can see even more similarities with what Enoch was told in the Enochic story. So the kinds of knowledge that could be revealed by the angels in the great table of the Watchtowers included the use of metals, the combining of substances, the transformation of substances, knowledge of healing and medicine, transportation, the nature of the four elements, various forms of secrets, giving various forms of counsel, and so-called mechanical crafts. So we see a lot of overlap again. So one thing that is noticeable here, where there does seem to be potentially a bit of overlap between what some of the Enochian angels can reveal and what the evil watchers revealed, is to do with the knowledge of metals. And this is a bit of an uncomfortable sort of thought to sit with. But if you sort of scrutinize it a bit more closely, you can see that referring to the knowledge of metals in either case comes with a completely different context. So it's a bit like giving somebody the knowledge to use a 3D printer. You can use a 3D printer to create anything. You can use a 3D printer to create weapons, which we've seen really do work recently. And you can also use them to create great works of art, replicas of Michelangelo's David, or things which bring order and beauty into the world. So similarly, the knowledge of metals can be used in either way, and that knowledge can be given with very different intentions behind it. So of course, the intention behind giving the knowledge by the Watchers was to create weapons, but the intention behind the angels in the Enochian system giving that knowledge seems to be related to alchemy. Figuring out how to transform and combine metals as the kind of alchemical art to try and purify matter and reveal more about the spiritual essence trapped within matter. And you know, what was seen as a very noble, holy pursuit in the form of engaging in the alchemical arts. So what seems like a similarity isn't actually one in the final analysis. However, it does need to be said that in the great table of the Watchtowers, there are not only the names of angels, but there are the names of evil spirits or demons as well. And particularly, they're generated using the black cross in the middle of the great table, as well as other parts of the great table. And perhaps this is because what was revealed to Dee was a whole picture of the different types of forces in the universe, including both the good and the bad. And it's also important to note as well that when the angels were conveying this knowledge to Dee and Kelley, they were very particular in telling them that these evil spirits whose names are given should never be called upon in the Enochian system. Another thing that the Enochic literature and the system of magic have in common is a sevenfold division of the palaces of heaven presided over by one of seven angels. So this is permeating all throughout the Enochian system of magic, which you can hear about more by watching some of my introductory videos on that topic. Watching my videos on the Sigillum Dei Emeth will also be helpful in that regard. But we see this same sevenfold division within the Enochic literature, at least within the first and third book of Enoch. The third book of Enoch describes the 7 heavens and 7 palaces, and the first book of Enoch describes the 7 archangels who rule different aspects of God's creation. You've got Raguel, Saraquiel, Remiel, and then the familiar Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. Another common theme throughout all of this is apocalypticism. So there was a lot in 1 Enoch, in the prophetic parts of those books, about the impending end times, the impending judgment of Israel and the Gentiles, the living and the dead, the coming of a righteous leader who would lead the final battle against evil, and all of those familiar apocalyptic themes that we have also in Christianity. And of course, in the Enochian system of magic, it is also very concerned with the impending end times, and in fact, the Enochian system of magic claims for itself that the working of that system is part of the process of setting the end times in motion. The other very obvious connection between these is that both the Enochic literature and the Enochian system of magic are monotheist through and through. This isn't always immediately apparent to people, because a lot of people's first exposure to Enochian is through the writings of Aleister Crowley and the kind of thelemic sort of magical stuff. And of course, that's not Christian, that's thelemic. But, you know, the vision and the voice, which is Crowley's visions of the 30 ethers, when he scried them, is full of thelemic symbolism. And a lot of people read that as one of the main sort of seminal works that helps them to understand Enochian magic. And so people have this impression that it's a thelemic thing, whereas at first, when the Enochian system was first created, it was very much a Christian sort of a thing, and people don't immediately get that because they assume that Christianity and magic are kind of mutually exclusive, that all magic is of the devil according to the Bible, so it can't be Christian. That is a later thing that developed. There's magic all throughout the Bible. I've done videos on that. And in Dee's own worldview, he saw no contradiction between practicing certain types of magic, at least, and his Christian faith. And if not Christianity in Enochian, then we see definitely a form of monotheism throughout Enochian magic, which would of course be very compatible with the Jewishness of the Enochic literature. But really what the Enochian system was starting to reveal was a new form of monotheism, you might say. But it draws very heavily upon Judaism and Christianity. And in fact, Christ appears several points within the Enochian system and has several different names in Enochian throughout the calls. And it is very important to the whole system of Enochian magic, as is indeed the Holy Ones and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The final thing that I would like to do to establish a connection between Enochian magic and Enochic literature is to talk about Merkavah mysticism and Hechelot literature. I think this is probably the strongest thread connecting them down through history. So the Enochic books, the 3 Enochic books, were both in the beginnings one of the inspirations for the emergence of so-called Merkavah mysticism within Judaism and the accompanying Hechelot literature of that form of mysticism. And in due course, that form of mysticism influenced the later books of Enoch. So it both influenced and was influenced by this Merkavah mysticism. So that's the Enochic texts. And then if you take Merkavah mysticism, then trace it further through history, beyond the 6th century AD, it eventually develops into the Holy Kabbalah. And Kabbalah was, of course, one of the major influences on John Dee and eventually his system of Enochian magic. And so much it influenced him that we see even the Gebethel working resembling a very similar kind of operation within Kabbalah, which is the operation of moving up through the 50 gates of Binah. 50 gates rather than 49, but the final gate is said to be inaccessible to human beings until the time of the coming of the Messiah, the end times. So very similar in many respects to the working of the 49 gates in the Gebethel ritual for gaining the knowledge of the tables of Logger. So we can see the same mystical root which gave birth to both the Enochic books and the Enochian system of magic. So it's no surprise then to see that there are indeed many similarities between them, and I think that it's safe to say that they were sort of operating within the same mythic framework, within the same universe, and that has got some incredible implications for the Enochian system of magic and our broader understanding of it. So that's what I'd like to leave you with tonight. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel to support my work, and if you want to support me further, hit join or thanks down below. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.